Hello, colleagues, and welcome to this webinar on the South and East Network for Social Sciences and CAM-DTP's competition. The plan today is to briefly present some information on the competition, the background, our motivations behind putting this competition together, and then allow for questions. You will see that I'm joined by Professor Michelle Ellefson, who's the director for Cambridge DTP, and I'm Fragkiskos Filippaios. I am the director for the South and East Network for Social Sciences. Just before we start, I'd like to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be made available at the end, shortly after the end, on the website, where you could then review it or share it with other interested colleagues. So with that in mind, I'll just start by saying, a few words about what we're going to cover today. I'll talk a bit about the purpose and the background of this competition, and then briefly explain the process, the rules, the criteria, what are the responsibilities of the students that we will be recruiting, and I will conclude by the two timelines, the timeline for the supervisor phase and the timeline for the studentship recruitment phase. And then hopefully we will have time for questions and answers. You might see me from time to time looking towards my side. It's because I've got a second monitor. I'll try to monitoring the chat. If you want, you could put questions there, but of course, you could also put questions by raising your hand and coming on mic. Right, so the history of this kind of competition goes back to the call from the ESRC for the second round of doctoral training partnerships, where the two DTPs came quite close in discussing possible ways of collaborating. The call was asking for additional collaboration across doctoral training partnerships. At the moment, there are 15 doctoral training partnerships across the country, most of them geographically kind of identified, so they cover specific geographical areas, and obviously SENSS and CAM-DTP are quite close geographically as well, so we felt that this was going to be a good opportunity for us to collaborate. We have collaborated already in a number of different areas. I can just give you one example. A few weeks back, I think it was on the 18th of June, the two DTPs co-organized and co-host a fantastic workshop on research in practice, where we brought students from the two cohorts, the CAM-DTP and the SENSS-DTP cohorts. The workshop was hosted by Goldsmiths University in London, which is one of the SENSS partners, and we had doctoral researchers from Cambridge, doctoral researchers from SENSS that they have already undertaken a placement, sharing their perspectives about the research in practice. The next step is also to look at sharing the specialist training that the two DTPs are offering, and therefore give the opportunity not only to doctoral researchers, but potentially also to supervisors to come together and share ideas. So in the process of the development of the bids, we said, is there something that we can offer which is not necessarily replicated across the other DTPs, which is something that we can demonstrate that we would like to develop and build capacity across collaborations. And we came up with this fantastic idea of having this inter-DTP competition. From a SENSS point of view, this is not the first time that we're doing kind of cross-council competitions. We used to run a very successful competition with NERC, with ERIS, which is the Natural Environment Research Council funded doctoral training partnership, but it's the first time that we actually see two DTPs within social sciences to try to come up with an inter-DTP competition. So in essence, the identifying element of this competition is that we expect the supervisory teams to include at least one supervisor from each DTP. And we expect that this will strengthen existing collaborations, but hopefully over the years, because this is the first time that we run this competition, but we aim to run this competition on an annual basis from now on, it will also be an opportunity to organically grow new collaborations. So if someone would ask me at this point, would you value more an existing collaboration between supervisors, or would you value more a newly formed collaboration? My answer would be, look, we're looking for both. In reality, we're looking to develop and build capacity in supervisory teams across the different institutions that form the DTP. So in that sense, the proposals that we expect to see should clearly demonstrate a genuine cross-DTP and cross-disciplinary approach. I can give you a couple of examples. I think we've already been approached, Michelle and I, by colleagues asking questions about, is this fit? Does this fit your purposes? And a lot of the time, what we get to see is, a social sciences problem that might require input by colleagues that are in other disciplines, and that is absolutely fine. This is a truly cross-collaboration and cross-DTP element. In essence, what I always say to supervisors is, look, if you take one of the components and the project is still viable, then this is not a cross-DTP, cross-disciplinary project. It's a standalone project that could, again, be funded through one of the other competitions. So the interdisciplinary nature and the strength of the collaboration will be a deciding factor in the way we fund proposals. Obviously, we both have our studentships, but what we did is we have specifically ring-fenced 2 studentships, and one of those studentships will be located to each DTP for the annual competition. We effectively co-fund those, which means that we will be able to demonstrate to the SRC that this is a truly kind of SENSS-CAM supervisor-led competition. So in reality, what the expectation is that at the end of the competition, we will have a small a cohort of 2. Eventually, as the years go, we will build up that cohort, and we will possibly end in the next 2 to 3 years of a cohort of 6, 7 students that are in that group of inter-DTP funded. So that's a bit about the purpose and the background. The process here is very similar to what we would call in a SENSS world, and I think in Cambridge CAM world, the same thing. The supervisor-led competition, where in essence what happens is a supervisory team puts together a proposal, that proposal gets evaluated, and then successful proposals go out and recruit students. We have, within SENSS, we have, for example, one competition which we call the collaborative project competition, where we expect supervisory teams to bring on board an external collaborator, formulate a problem, formulate a PhD project, and then recruit a student towards that PhD. Now, in this competition, at least one of the supervisors must belong to each DTP. So we would expect to see supervisory teams, and those don't necessarily only need to be 2 supervisors. It could be 3 supervisors, it could be 4 supervisors, as long as those supervisory teams span across the 2 DTPs, and they develop together a research question, a relevant proposal, and they apply to secure a studentship to work on that research project. In this competition, we have created space, and that's quite important, for collaborative projects. So you could have supervisors coming from the 2 DTPs, but at the same time, you might want to involve an external partner as well. And what I mean here by external partner is a non-HEI, not higher education institution. They could come from the third sector, they could be a corporate, they could even come from local or central government. And we strongly encourage that. I appreciate this is not always
Apologies, everyone. I think something has happened to Fragkiskos. So we'll just give him a moment to join back.
I'm really sorry. I don't know what has happened there, but my Zoom decided to switch off completely.
It hasn't been very long, Fragkiskos, so I was just about ready to share the slides, but when you
That's
came
fine.
back.
It was a very. I thought I started looking around and I thought perhaps this is a complete power cut, but in reality it wasn't. So I don't know what happened here. Let me just reshare my screen in terms of my slides. And I'm really sorry. Usually I have a quite stable internet connection, but right. So I was talking about the online platform. So SENSS is using this online platform called HI Apply. It's a relatively straightforward platform where colleagues can create an account, and through that account, they can basically input the information we require. My advice in terms of HI platform is always try to put the information in a Word file first, just in case you had a catastrophic failure like the one I just had with Zoom, where the computer decides to switch off and you lose all that work. It doesn't save online. It does save online after you submit, but it doesn't necessarily save on and after you click the save button. But if you work on something and then suddenly you decide you haven't saved the work and you haven't progressed it, you might lose a substantial part of the work. So my advice with all these online platforms is trying to keep that information in a Word file. The deadline for submitting the information and the application will be on the 10th of September, 2025, close of play. I think it's 4 o'clock, if I remember correctly. The exact information is in the guidance. And what Michelle and I are doing currently is we're working on putting together a panel that will have representatives from those DTPs, and we will be reviewing all applications and scrutinizing them and scoring them in order to decide which proposals will go forward. We will put forward the best 4 proposals, and we will advertise them on jobs.ac.uk. We will use all the channels and the mechanisms that we have as doctoral training partnerships through our student populations to basically get them to understand that these opportunities are out there. And we expect to open up studentship applications on the 20th of October and close on the 7th of January. We will be interviewing the candidates together with the supervisory teams, and then the best 2 applicants across the 4 projects will be awarded a studentship to work on that. So it's a kind of a staged process where you go through the application on HI Apply. We will decide to advertise 4 projects, and then we will go out and recruit students, and the best 2 students for those projects will be the ones, together with the projects, that will be funded in the end. Generally, these competitions have a relatively good success rate if you're a supervisor. Just to give you a sense of size, when we run the collaborative project competition at SENSS, we tend to receive about 30 to 32 applications, and we usually fund about 10 projects. So it's about a 30% success rate for a supervisor to secure a funded student. So that's the kind of the overall timeline. Uh, uh, I think it's worth highlighting here that as part of the application, we ask you to provide us with a kind of a marketing plan as well. So how would you like to kind of advertise the studentship? And we do that not for any other reason, but to make sure that, you know, collectively we have thought about securing the best students. And last year we did quite a lot of, for example, quite a lot of promotion on the studentship phase of our collaborative competition, and we ended up receiving something like 100 applications for the 9 projects. And the plan here is that we will be able to recruit, you know, the top talent in the country and internationally to these studentships. So that's the kind of the process of the competition. And then the rules are relatively straightforward, very similar to what we would do in our own competitions. First of all, the research proposals must fall within the ESRC remit and be aligned with the thematic areas and steers for both DTPs. Now, one of the key questions that has come up from colleagues at this point is, you know, I've got this project and I'm looking to involve, for example, someone from engineering. Would that be fine? The answer is yes, it is fine to involve other disciplines as long as the questions we're asking are social sciences questions. So, for example, I can give you one example of a project that we currently have. We have a project around hydrogen towns with cut and gas. And it's based at Cranfield University with a fantastic team there. The project is not about how do you design a safe hydrogen town. The project is not about how do you, what is the technology behind the use of hydrogen, but the question is about people's perception about hydrogen as a safe and efficient fuel. So the methodological approach is a qualitative one, you know, with interviews of the public. The whole question is about, you know, behavioral perspectives, behavioral change. So although there is a technical element to the project, the social sciences is the main driving force and where the question actually is positioned. So it's really, really important to think about how do you position these questions so they fall within the ESRC remit. And we only allow, unfortunately, one application per each supervisory team. So, you know, supervisory teams could have multiple ideas. They could express, you know, different, they could work on different projects, but we expect to see only one from each supervisory team. We don't allow more than one. And then, of course, if the project has this collaborative partner, we expect them to provide an additional supervisor and be involved in the supervision. The eligibility requirements for supervisors are the ones that the 2 DTPs are working, so there are no surprises there. Usually, you know, early career researchers qualify under, you know, the home institution. So in essence, and in very short, if your home institution recognizes you as a supervisor, then you fit the eligibility criteria. If you haven't completed a doctoral student, if you haven't completed at least one studentship, then what used to happen there and what we would require is potentially have someone else joining that supervisory team who has led a student, a doctoral researcher, to completion. So we get an experienced member of the supervisory team, but that doesn't actually stop you from actually being a supervisor. We would expect all supervisors to have undertaken supervisory development training, either offered by the institution, offered by the DTP. So at SENSS, we offer supervisory training. The awards could be between the 3.5 years and the 4.5 years. Usually students that apply to this type of projects come with a background, existing background in social sciences, and therefore in most of the cases it will be closer to the 3.5. But you know, if we end up having an application from a very bright young undergraduate student, that's absolutely fine. We have the tools there to get them trained for that. We need to comply with the academic and residential eligibility requirements. In essence, everybody who doesn't hold a British passport or doesn't have permanent residence or settled status is being considered an international student. So we need to keep that in mind. And each of the DTPs will provide additional research costs. We have rules and regulations that tell us exactly how much we can spend in addition to the project. You could put, of course, in the application things like fieldwork, things like difficult language training, especially if the student and the project is being located abroad. So all these are things that you could put in your application. The criteria consist of 5 kind of big areas. The most important one is the quality and feasibility of the proposal. And the feasibility from experience has kind of gained traction over the last few years, especially because now the ESRC, and it's worth pointing that out, the ESRC requires us to have the student completing within the funded period. So the ESRC now gives a standard 3.5 years, but what they expect is that the student won't go on a write-up period. The student has to complete within that funded period. And therefore, the feasibility of the proposal becomes quite an important element there. I usually say that when I do webinars on our collaborative project competition, this is not a research assistant you're going to be recruiting. It's not a research associate. It's not someone that is already trained to a doctoral researcher, and someone that will require to train alongside the development and the creation of new knowledge. And one of the, for example, key pitfalls I have seen in collaborative projects and supervisor-led projects is that the project is too wide, and then you don't necessarily see where the student fits within that project. So when you design a project, or if you want to recycle one of your existing applications, keep that in mind, that you're not hiring a research assistant, you're not hiring a research associate, you're effectively developing a doctoral researcher. And then we've got 4 more areas where we will be looking, and each of those criteria has a relatively lengthy description in the appendix of the guidance. We would be looking at the interdisciplinarity and the impact potential of the proposal, whether there is, enough discussion around the impact, how the project will generate that impact. Of course, whether it fits with the studentship, as I said already, that's a criterion which is quite important. Then the quality of the collaboration, the supervisory expertise, are there strong links between supervisor teams? If there are not strong links, is there potential to develop those links, going back to the point I've made earlier about existing established collaborations and new collaborations? Are there any evidence of collaborative outputs? And then, of course, within that framework, what are the opportunities for the researcher, for the doctoral researcher, to build the network? How in essence, how the collaboration will give additional opportunities to the doctoral researcher to explore that cross-supervisory, cross-institutional team and their networks. And then, of course, is there a case where the collaboration enables additional cross-DTP training? What is the role of the placement? How have you designed or thought about the placement, and how that placement might kind of enable the researcher to develop transferable skills? We're not necessarily asking you to, if you haven't done already, to identify and secure the placement at this point. But what we ask you in that criterion is to basically demonstrate that you have thought about the placement and how that placement fits with the overall training of that doctoral researcher. So that's quite important there. Now, when it comes to the student themselves, the student will be registered at the same university which employs the primary supervisor, and then they will follow the guidance, the core program, the induction, the process that apply. One point that we have received comments from colleagues is that when a student has supervisory teams that span across institutions, there is an institution that can return that student for HISA perspectives. And that has always been the case with any cross-institutional, cross-DTP studentship. Here, we expect that one of the two students will be based at the SENSS University and the other will be based at the CAM-DTP University, and therefore I appreciate that the second supervisor won't be able to submit that student as a completion formally, and perhaps things might change in the future. But the benefit for the second supervisor is the ability there to develop additional links and collaborations with supervisors from across the other DTPs. What we expect also supervisors is to have this supplementary program that will enable the students to train. And in all cases, we will have to comply with the SRC's postgraduate funding guide. The students will do an initial development needs analysis, very similar to the things that we currently do for all other competitions. And we expect them to attend mandatory events at their home DTP. Now, the plan here is that we will allow and we will invite the student from the other DTP to some of those events. So, for example, SENSS is organizing a summer conference. The invitation will be there for those students to attend, both of them to attend and become part of the cohort. And we're working on identifying ways where we can make funding work better to give those opportunities. And everything related to the student, the DNA, the DTP activity report, the UKRI research fee submission will always have to happen. They will happen through the student's home DTP, as we call it. The timeline for the supervisor phase. So the key dates that you need to keep at the back of your heads is the 10th of September, which is when the deadline and the HI apply platform closes. We'll then send applications to institutions to do an initial institutional sifting in order to ensure that the valid applications, eligibility requirements are being checked and everything like that. Then we're going to have the SENSS-CAM shifting panel, and that's between the 23rd and the 30th of September. And then we will be reviewing those applications in that period. And by the 2nd of October, we expect to have all the reviews ready and meet between the 6th and the 8th of October. So the panel will meet not physically, but through Zoom to decide which are the top applications and the applications that will give them the opportunity to go out and recruit. Obviously, this is subject to both management board confirmation, but in the past, that was more of a typical step in the whole process. We will let supervisors know by the 14th of October, and then hopefully within the next week, we will go live for the studentship adverts. And we will use as a jobs.ac.uk, we will use the social media of the two DTPs adverts, and I will also have the opportunity at that time. I'm also developing and delivering webinars for SENSS students that are looking to apply for the student-led competition. So I will also promote those opportunities within those seminars, because I will have the information there, and I'll put it as a slide saying, look, we're also advertising and we have opened these kind of studentships. So that is the starting point of the studentship timeline, where we will open HI apply. The deadline for that will be the 7th of January. And then again, very similar steps. Institutions will sift those applications. We'll have the SENSS-CAM sifting panel reviewing the applications of students. And then we will agree to meet a shortlist for interviews. And we will interview candidates in order to select the top ones for the awards. And we will circulate those nominations. We expect that the framework will be very similar to the framework for all other competitions in terms of letting the students know. So usually those outcomes are circulated in the beginning of April, subject, of course, to the management board confirmations. And I think the management board for both DTPs are scheduled around that beginning of April. So it put us at a very good position with regards to other DTPs, where early April is usually the early DTPs that announce their studentships. Any additional information you might want to get in terms of the academic side, CAM-DTP is for those that you're coming from CAM, SENSS for those that you come from SENSS. And Michelle can testify to that. We have already cases where the teams are already working across the two DTPs. So I had cases where supervisors were asking questions around Cambridge involvement, and I presented that information to CAM, saying, look, this is what the project looks like, and is it feasible? And so we are already. So if you feel if you send it to one email, it's probably going to be shared, that information, to the other email. It's just a way of us filtering the information. The only case where SENSS has the complete responsibility is about queries on the online platform. So, for example, you had a case where you can't create an account, you have problems with accessing the platform. We have been using the platform for the last 4 or 5 years now. It's relatively stable. With technology, I always use the term relatively. They're relatively stable, easy to use, easy to access. You just need to register, and once you register, you will create a profile, and through that profile, you will apply. You can apply, and we've got a dedicated SENSS-CAM microsite on the SENSS website, which has all the guidance for supervisors, all the information, everything that I presented today in a relatively long format, through the policy and the guidelines, and where we will also be posting the recording for the video from today's session. Right, I think we've got, I said about half an hour in terms of presentation, and now we've got a potential time for questions and answers. Michelle, is there anything else you think I should have covered, or?
No, I think it was very thorough. It's amazing when we do these events, even though we're different DTPs, where ideas started uniquely. There's a lot of things that we're so parallel, and that's, I suppose, because of the ESRC requirements, isn't it? So.
Exactly. That's our ruler, let's say.
It is.
We can't avoid that. And just to let colleagues know, just in case they haven't been aware, the ESRC now follows the new deal for PhD that was published by UKRI. So we're looking gradually towards more of a harmonization across the research councils in terms of PhD rules and regulations. Those rules and regulations will come into effect from the 1st of October, and they will apply to the studentships that we will be awarding this year. And these kind of rules and regulations are a bit more flexible in terms of the student support. So they provide us with funding for doing disability support allowance assessment. They are a bit more generous when it comes to sickness, absence, and everything like that. So that's something that comes forward on the 1st of October and will be applicable to students that go through this competition as well.
Fragkiskos, there's a question on, two questions actually on the Q&A. One is about international students. Do you want to talk about how all
yes.
of KRI is set up on that front?
So the answer is yes, that it is open to international students. So international students can apply to those studentships. And the SENSS teams are on the SENSS website, and on the first page we've got, in very short, 6 themes. One is sustainability and climate emergency, health, well-being and social care, justice institutions and social change, digital social sciences, resolving uncertainty and addressing crisis, and advanced methods for social and economic research. So these are the 6 themes. The ESRC requires us to have a quota of 30% across the cohort for international students. Now, with the exception of students that are coming forward from the economics discipline, where that quota is 50%. So what we have done in the past, and Michelle and I will be working closely, is we will try to utilize that quota in a way that we will enable students and projects to recruit international candidates as well.
Can I just add, Fragkiskos, while you look at the next question, UKRI, so regardless of the Research Council, will not pay any international fees that the university might charge where the student is based. At least within CAM-DTP, and Fragkiskos, I think you said this was true within SENS, there may be a variety of mechanisms within your home university in terms of to help support that difference. So the best thing to do, should you have at the point of wanting to select your top applicants, someone who is international, speaking to the contact at your university, or even coming to the DTP will refer you to the contact at your university who can explain what might be available. So there's some changing rules on that as well within the new deal. So it's easiest to wait for that level of detail till you have potentially an international student. But in terms of being open and in terms of the limits that we have placed on us, that is at least standard across the board.
We have a slightly more harmonized approach at SENS. So this is one of the cases where I'll say we're slightly different. So at SENS, when we formed the consortium, the partner institutions committed themselves to funding the difference between the home and the international studentship fees. So effectively, our students don't have to pay anything in addition in terms of the fees if they are international students, because in some institutions, the difference is actually quite substantial. So the partners, the SENS partners have committed to that, which means that there is a fee waiver effectively. The next question was around whether supervisors can be from the same department, one from SENS and one from CAM. Yes, they can. And the project can be very, of course, cross-disciplinary. The things I have in mind is, if you have two supervisors coming from two business schools, one might be someone who works in organizational behavior and the other can work in, I don't know, international business. And the project is around multinationals, human rights, and institutional environments. That's a cross-disciplinary type of project. So the answer is yes. Now, how much cross-disciplinary the project needs to be? I think what we're looking for at the moment is predominantly the formation of the teams, and through that formation of the teams to develop capacity, and less around the cross-disciplinary element of the project. I mentioned taking away part of the project and then being standalone. So what I was referring to there is that let's say that you have a project that is submitted from a SENS supervisor, and that SENS supervisor invites a CAM supervisor to be part of the supervisory team. The main element of evaluation there is what is the value added from the cross DTP supervision for that project. Is there truly value added? Is it a project that could have happened without actually the input of the supervisor from Cambridge DTP or CAM-DTP? Is that the case? If that is the case, then it's a standalone project. It can be submitted through SENS or through CAM separately. It doesn't have to be part of this cross-institutional, cross-DTP collaboration. So this is what I was referring to in terms of being a standalone project. Is very similar to what I say in terms of we have collaborative projects at SENS. And you see supervisors developing those projects together with a collaborator and external partner. My question is this an academically driven project, or is this actually a project that caters to a specific and clear need of the collaborative partner? So in reality, if you take the collaborative partner out, is it still a project that will stand? Then what's the point of having it as a collaborative project? That's my response to that question. Michelle, do you want to say anything else on this one?
I think the only other thing that I would maybe highlight, which can sometimes be a confusion, is that the ESRC has what they call an interdisciplinary steer. It's driven by the ESRC, and we have to meet so many in this category. And I think Fragkiskos, you mentioned something about people asking if they could do something with engineering, which isn't a social science. And the ESRC is quite keen to see social science and non-social science collaboration. And so that's kind of an opportunity, but it doesn't have to be an opportunity. And I think that's where your explanation as well about cross-disciplinary, at least within CAM-DTP, people get quite confused about this because the ESRC has a very specific definition. It's like going across research councils, because I think UKRI is quite interested in trying to get research to occur across the research councils. I think because social science itself is quite interdisciplinary, more broadly speaking, it becomes a kind of a confused term. So I was just going to highlight that you might see, you know, within either of our DTPs, this almost kind of like a quite very specific definition of interdisciplinary. And I think broadly speaking, we're happy with that more broad social science discipline, except for when we're talking about that very specific ESRC kind of remit. But so you might see that in some of our materials because we have to adhere to that ESRC remit, and it is quite confusing, I think.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to highlight that it's kind of, there's some flexibility here, but there is some areas where we're not flexible, and just highlighting that's confusing.
From a UKRI perspective, if someone goes and reads the UKRI definition of interdisciplinarity, this clearly is projects across research councils. But obviously, what Michelle said about social sciences being a very diverse kind of set of subjects, you could have that interdisciplinarity even within ESRC. The next one is about supervisory experience, about whether the primary supervisor is an ECR, and whether it's okay to have a CAM more experienced supervisor. I think here probably we need to respond with the university regulations. So usually the host institution university regulations will require that the primary supervisor has some form of completion. So for example, if in this case the CAM supervisor is the experienced one and the student is located at Cambridge at CAM, then you don't need, you could have an ECR from SENSS as a second member of that supervisory team. If you have an ECR from SENSS being the primary supervisor, then it's most likely the host institution of that supervisor will require them anyway, on the basis of their host regulations, to have an experienced person on the team. So that experienced person can be the third supervisor. So the primary and secondary will be the SENSS and CAM supervisors, and then the third supervisor will be the experienced person from SENSS. And I think that's simply down to the regulations of the different institutions that form the two DTPs.
And that's true even within our DTPs, right? So that we have that, we've got, I think things are complicated enough with the ESRC, so we don't worry too much about that from an ESRC perspective. But our universities do have rules, and so we have to defer to those as well.
The next question is regarding the term placement and whether it refers to the time spent by the student at the secondary supervisor's unit or refer to the application of an external partner. The answer is no to both of those things. So the term placement is a term that is being introduced by the ESRC. Various DTPs have tried to move away from that. So I know that CAM-DTP calls them fellowships. We still call them placements. It is effectively that period of internship of a student within an external organization that is now a requirement by the SRC. So the SRC provides a minimum of 3.5 years. The 3 years are the standard time for a PhD. 0.25, so 3 additional months are to cover and cater for additional training the student might need. And the remaining 3 months to the 3.5 years are 3 months that the SRC expects the student to spend within an organization that is outside their home institution. And that can be a charity, a business, government placement, anything like that. So that's what the reference to placement. So imagine that you have a project that develops a framework. The placement, for example, can take the form of the student going to an organization and working on that framework with that organization. There are a lot of gray areas here with regards to the ESRC guidance. So in the very beginning, the ESRC said that placement has to have nothing to do with the PhD, so completely separate. we pushed back and said that doesn't make any sense. You're expecting us to develop the student and help them develop skills. It's worth actually having the PhD being implemented in that placement. And I think gradually the SRC is moving away from that very rigid approach that I had at the beginning, and they're allowing us to be more flexible and reflect on kind of the nature of our DTPs. So the placement that we refer to in the evaluation criteria is that placement that the student will do with an external organization. This is why I said you might have already secured that placement, or you might want just to demonstrate that you've thought about that placement period and how the student can actually benefit from that.
So I think, Fragkiskos, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the SRC, although they're willing for there to be a bit more things that might be broadly related to what's happening in the studentship, they do want the students to get some new skills. And I think a key new skill might be, you know, thinking about the impact of the research in the wider community, policy, all sorts of things. So they're keen that, you know, the social scientists that they're training have not just excellent research skills, but they're also able to apply research into practice in a variety of ways. So I think that's probably where we're going to end up, is that you have to show that they're getting a different skill that than they're developing as part of the PhD thesis itself.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think about the researcher development framework, at least the iteration that existed until a couple of weeks ago, because Vita has now revamped the RDF, predominantly domain D, which is around engagement and impact, you would expect the student to develop those skills during their placement. And usually these are skills which are not developed elsewhere in the PhD, at least in the non-academic perspective. The next two questions, we can take them together. One is whether for the final decision there are only 2 students that get chosen, and then the next question is one where it's asked whether, you know, you've got 2 funded projects, one will go to SENSS, one to CAM. What if there are not enough applications from one of the 2 DTPs? We obviously, with the publicity we're doing, we hope that this is not going to be the case. So we're not going to be only receive 4 applications, but we still have the ability to actually say, look, the SENSS project is not a strong enough project. So for this year, we won't go with 2 studentships. We will only fund 1 studentship. And we might select then the 3 CAM projects to go forward for advertisement, but, you know, 1 studentship might be allocated. So we expect to work with supervisors and everyone to ensure that we got enough, a good enough pool for projects that will allow us to have a fair, you know, and good selection of the 3. And remember, at the end, is not necessarily the quality out of those 4, is not the quality of the project that matters, but it's the quality of the student that applies to those projects that matters.
Yes, and I think the ESRC has a lot of quite specific requirements for students, and so it's the sort of thing that even if, yeah, we might think a given project looks really amazing, but it doesn't recruit as well as another project. We have to be linking to, you know, the ESRC's remit that we're finding excellent students to fund. So it will really depend on who the applicants are and the strength of their application.
And in the past, when I did webinars around studentship, so for example, I do one webinar for a couple of webinars for our collaborative projects in the studentship phase. Supervisors, and I always send out those invitations to supervisors that actually engage with those webinars, and they came and they talked about the project, because we give them the ground to talk about the project, actually recruited and received far more applications than supervisors that, you know, simply relied on the advert on jobs.ac.uk and nothing more than that.
Seems like the end of our questions.
Questions, yeah. Anybody else who wants to come on mic? What I'll do is I'll probably stop sharing. It might be easier for us to see each other.
Oh, there's a question about will it be shared? Yes, Fragkiskos said it would. And can you say more about where it might be accessed? We can put it
Yeah.
on our CAM-DTP website as well.
Yes. So what usually happens, the process is once Zoom sends me a notification that the recording is ready, I download it, put it onto, send it over to our administrator. The usual process is that we also post these on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, which are publicly available, and therefore you don't have to go through a website to access it. But the website, the two websites will have links to the recording, the presentation, and the questions and answers. And I always have one more. We have one more of those webinars later in August. Just in case people miss this opportunity, they reviewed the recording and they have additional questions. Even if some of you might have between now and then have worked on a project and you might have questions about that specific, you could join the second part where we tend to allow time for questions and answers and ask those questions.
Fragkiskos, once you have it on YouTube, just send us the link and then we'll link directly to the YouTube so that all traffic goes to the YouTube video.
Yeah. Right. I think we're almost up for time as well, with a small cut from my side in terms of the.
Oh, we've got one more question, I think, on the way.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Sergita, for warning us that there would be a question.
Yeah.
So when you say the marketing link to the placement, do you know, Fragkiskos, what that might mean?
There is no marketing part regarding the placement. What we require in terms of your application is not a marketing plan in terms of the placement, but a marketing plan for recruiting the best students. So you need to tell us, what the advert should look like, whether there are any requirements from a student point of view in order to apply to your projects. So are there any specific ones? For example, imagine a project which is heavily technical. Yes, of course, we can recruit students towards that, but are there any specific requirements that you might have that studentship? If you think about it like a job description, what are the desirable, what are the essential elements that the students should require, and how are you going to reach out yourselves as supervisors to recruit the students? So that's about the studentship, the marketing plan that we require. There is nothing related to placement that requires a marketing plan. What is required from a placement point of view in your application is, if you haven't secured between now and the deadline a placement for that student, to tell us what is your thinking process, what kind of organization you would expect to host a placement for that student.
I just also say, Fragkiskos, the one thing that we'd want the supervisory teams to do is use the networks you have. So if you're on social media, talking about the studentship on social media, if your departments are on social media, asking them to talk about the studentship on social media, if there are professional organizations that will share information about studentships for free, asking them to also share a link to the studentship so that you're what your network is, and that you're using that network as well as what we can provide at a DTP, because we think that that is going to help in terms of reaching a wide number of potential applicants.
Anna is asking a very interesting question. So Anna is asking whether there was a requirement from interested supervisors to send an outline of the topic. And at least I know from a SENSS point of view, this hasn't been the case, unless I'm missing. So at least from both DTPs, I can very clearly say we haven't requested anything else in terms of expressions of interest or anything like that. It might be part of a developmental process that departments want to engage with. But at the end of the day, that can also be the case with us responding to whether those projects are suitable from an ESRC perspective. So
And
it's probably a local one, I think.
Yeah, well, the other thing it could be, just because of the deadline, is that within CAM-DTP, we have another competition that is going on. So we also advertise studentships that aren't necessarily collaborative across with CAM-DTP, but we have, and SENS, but we have other kinds of studentships that we advertise. So it may have kind of gotten linked up with that, because that competition is, well, it's not really a competition. How we're doing it is, if people meet some criteria, which is around the things we struggle with in a typical student-led competition. We're trying to raise the profile of the priorities that the ESRC has for us that we can't usually do in traditional routes. So that particular call, the deadline is the 17th. Now, if you're interested in the cross-CAM, or sorry, the cross-DTP sort of route, which is one supervisor is at SEN and one supervisor is at CAM, then you can ignore that deadline and focus on this particular call. We're also kind of, we realize it's confusing that we've got two competitions. The deadlines aren't quite harmonized. So if we get anything through our call that is for this route, we will talk to those supervisors so they have every opportunity to also be on this route if they would like to. So we're aware that it's a little bit confusing for people at CAM universities, that there are two things happening, and we're being as flexible and open as possible to anybody who might qualify for both.
Right. I think that's probably it, unless anyone else wants to notify us that there's another question coming up, just in case. I know sometimes it takes a bit of a while to type a question.
Yeah.
If not, I'll just thank Michelle and thank all of you for attending today's webinar. I hope you found the information we shared with you useful. As I said, there is one more webinar coming up in the beginning of August with additional, well, the presentation is going to be the same, but there's going to be additional questions and answers there, time for that. If you feel that you have a question that hasn't been answered today, or you come up with a question, except from obviously emailing us, and the email details will be on the presentation and the recording. Feel free to join that webinar and ask your question live, and we will do our best to respond to everything.